Welcome back to the Art Trippin lecture series. In this video, we will talk about some basic art vocabulary. These are art terms that will help you speak more confidently about art and will make sure that we are all on the same page so that we have the same language. We want to make sure we have a common language, so I'm going to review some basic vocabulary that will help you talk about art. I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and I'm an art historian, and this is Art Trippin Lecture Series. Hi, I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and this is Art Trippin. So some of the questions that we art historians ask when we look at an object are pretty basic. So who made this object? And so it might be a specific artist, or we might be referring to a specific geographic region, a place, or a culture. Who made it? How old is it? What is it made out of? So here's a vocabulary word. What an artwork is made out of is the medium. This basically just means the materials. So it might be bronze, marble, if we're talking about a sculpture, or it might be oil paint or tempera paint, if we're talking about a painting. And there's like so many materials that art can be made out of. So the term you might see is medium. We might ask, what is the function of the artwork? Like, why was it made? How was it used? Was it a utilitarian object or a useful object, like a vase that could hold a liquid? Was it a painting that hung on the wall? What value did it have beyond being aesthetically pleasing? Was it used to express some ideas about power? Is it something that was used to convince people to think a certain way? So what is the function? We might also ask, what is the style? So in an art history class, you might learn about different art historical styles. For example, medieval or Byzantine style, Renaissance or Baroque styles. So we're going to learn about these different styles. But even at a more basic level, we want to talk about the form, or like how the artwork looks. And then in addition to style, we also want to talk about the iconography, so the subject matter or the content. So form is kind of how it looks, or the style, and content is sort of who or what is depicted in the image. What's that subject matter? So when we're talking about style, we might refer to some of the elements of art and the principles of design. You can think of them kind of like the alphabet of a language. So these are the basic building blocks of an artwork. So for example, if we're talking about a painting, we might talk about things like line. How did the artist use lines in the painting? Shape, color, which colors did they use? Texture, pattern, value or tone, how light or dark something is. So these are the formal elements of art. We might also talk about the principles, the formal principles of design. So here we might talk about unity, we might talk about balance or scale or movement or emphasis. Is there a part of the artwork that is emphasized? And how does the artist do that? In addition to knowing these basic terms for the formal elements and the principles of design, you also want to know these keywords. The first one is representational. This seems kind of basic. Here we have an image of Michelangelo's David, and it's representational. It's an artwork that looks like something in the real world, something that exists, a human. In contrast, we might call something like this sculpture that just appears to be sort of shapes non-representational. Non-representational means it doesn't look like anything. It's just shapes or lines or colors. These two terms, representational and non-representational, will be very useful. Now, when we look at the term non-representational, we will see that another way you can describe this is abstract. But abstract exists on a scale. What does abstraction mean? Abstract means something has been reduced to its most basic forms. This is like Think of a little kid drawing a stick figure. That's very abstract. It's still representational because it looks like a figure or a human, but it's abstracted. It's a human reduced to maybe a circle, triangle, rectangle, whatever it may be. Now, that abstraction exists, as I said, on a scale from slightly abstracted all the way over to complete abstraction, which is non-representational. So what do I mean? Let's look at this example. This is a painting by Van Gogh of a tree. It is representational because it still looks like a tree. However, unless you're actually tripping, like not just art tripping, but maybe on some hallucinogenics, that is not what a tree actually looks like. It is an abstracted version of a tree with these kind of wild branches reaching out almost like little fingers or snakes, and there's a sense of movement in this painting. It's very expressive, but it's still representational, and it's an abstract representation of a tree. Another image that I like to show people that helps them understand the difference between these two terms is this image here of these dolls. And here you can see like this kind of typical Barbie doll or Bratz doll or, you know, kind of doll face is an abstracted version of what a human face actually would look like. So we can see this more naturalistic face next to the abstracted face. So these terms, abstracted and naturalistic, will be very useful terms to help you describe artwork that you're looking at. So let's practice looking at a work of art from art history. Here we are looking at Bernini, Gian Lorenzo Bernini. He's an Italian Baroque artist from the 17th century or the 1600s. We are looking at Bernini's Apollo and Daphne from 1622, 1625. This is carved out of marble. It's about 8 feet tall, and it lives in the Galleria Borghese in Rome, Italy. So let's talk about the style. What would we say about this if we wanted to explain the style? And remember, when we're doing a formal analysis or we're talking about the style, it doesn't mean that we actually have to know anything about the artwork. We don't have to know who made it or when they made it or why. We're just looking at it with our eyes and talking about what we see. So the first thing I would say is this is definitely naturalistic. It looks like real life. It looks like two people, or in this case, at least one is technically a deity or a god, but it looks like these two people, so it looks naturalistic. You also might hear people use the term realistic. I tend to not use that because there is this term realism that refers to a movement in art history in the 19th century, so I don't like to get that mixed up in there, so I use this term naturalistic. This is kind of what they used in the Renaissance. So I would say this is naturalistic, a naturalistic depiction. And the other thing that I might say, and we're going a little bit beyond description, like a description would be like, there are two figures, one is sort of chasing the other, they look like humans, one may be male, one may be female, it's white marble, it's 8 feet tall, like that's a description. But when we're doing a formal analysis, we're talking really about those elements of art. And the big one I would talk about here is how the artist uses form or line to create this sense of movement and drama. So you see this dynamism in this sculpture is created by using these strong diagonal lines. So we have one figure reaching up, the figure in the front is kind of reaching up her arms, and the figure that's chasing her is reaching back with one of his arms, and one of his legs is kind of kicking off. So we have these strong diagonal lines. And if you know anything about lines, you know that diagonal lines in an artwork create a sense of movement. In contrast, check out Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. We have this very strong horizontal line of the table with the white tablecloth on it. That creates a sense of stability. It's a very symmetrical composition, and the horizontal line is a stabilizing force in the image. And that kind of symbolizes how, in this context of this painting, The Last Supper, God or Christ, who's in the middle, is the stabilizing force in the world, just like this strong horizontal line creates this solid, stable image. In contrast, let's go back to our Bernini sculpture. These diagonal lines create dynamism and drama and movement. So this is how we do a stylistic analysis. It doesn't require that we know anything about the artist, who made it, when, where, and why. We're just talking about what we see. And this is always, in my opinion, like the best first step to trying to understand an artwork. The next thing that you can do is talk about the iconography. What is iconography? It sounds like this kind of fancy term. It's actually a pretty basic term. It comes from Greek. It comes from the Greek term icon, which means image, and graphe, which means write. So the idea is, how does the image write? How does the image tell a story? How does the image create meaning? So when we're talking about iconographic analysis, we're talking about who or what is depicted and what is the meaning of that subject matter. What is the symbolic meaning of that subject matter? So iconography is the study of visual images as a symbolic language. And one thing you want to remember is that iconography is culturally specific. So you as the observer need to be familiar with the culture in which the artwork was made in order to understand the symbolism or the iconography. So let me give you an example. Look at this image. Look at this image. Who is this man? You know who this guy is. You do not need to read or speak English to know that this is Superman. And in fact, almost anywhere in the world, because of American cultural imperialism, almost anywhere in the world, somebody is going to know that this is Superman. But how? How do they know this? What is telling us who this is? Well, you're actually reading the image when you look at this. Even if you don't read English, even if you don't know that he has this S logo on his chest, even if you don't know that as a letter, you can tell that this is Superman. Why? Because what is the iconography? Superman is pretty much almost always wearing a blue unitard with red boots, a red cape. In some instances, he puts his red underwear on the outside of his unitard for some reason. And then he has this logo on his chest, and he has dark hair, and he flies in the sky. So if you put all these things together, this helps your eye understand that this is Superman. But it has to be all of this put together, because not every dark-haired guy who flies is Superman, because there's also Batman, right? When you look at images of Superman, so here we see an image of Superman from the 1940s, from the 1970s, and the 2000s. And if you look at all three of these images, he's pretty much wearing the same thing. It changes a little bit. You can see that by 2013, Superman has stopped wearing his underwear on the outside of his unitard because it's extremely dorky and unnecessary. He has also, 2013 Superman has been slamming the protein shakes, and he has been hitting the gym. And you can actually see from the 70s to the 2000s this different body type that is expressed. So these images also tell us about gender and gender expectations, what this culture expects this kind of ideal man to look like, right? So you can learn a lot from looking at these images. But let me get back to my point. My point is that this is the iconography. These three images are all the same guy, and it doesn't change much over a long period of time. And that's kind of like Egyptian art. Egyptian art doesn't change for many, many hundreds and thousands of years. And so we can understand that iconography if we're able to read the image and understand its symbolism. Now, let's take a look at this Superman comic book cover where we see this eagle landing on Superman's arm. I want to point this out to you because this is how you can understand that iconography is culturally specific. We see this bald eagle landing on Superman's arm, and the eagle in the United States of America has this symbolism that is, we associate it with freedom, liberty, strength, and power. It's like very like America, like very strong symbol of freedom and power in the United States. However, an eagle, say in Mexican culture, might have a really different symbolism. The eagle might refer more to, for example, the Mexica origin story, or this eagle that you see on the cactus on the Mexican flag. So the point is that the symbolism of the eagle changes depending on the culture that you're in. So this is what I mean when I say that iconography or symbolism is culturally specific. Now that we understand sort of how to do a stylistic analysis, we looked at one example where we looked at Bernini's Daphne and Apollo, and we talked about these strong diagonal lines that create a sense of movement and drama. How do we now understand the iconography? Well, the truth is you need to understand that cultural moment in time when it was made, and you need a little bit of context to understand that iconography or subject matter. So what is the iconography? So first of all, this is an image made in the 1600s, but it's depicting a story from ancient Greek mythology. And in fact, this is depicting a very specific moment in Greek mythology from a very specific literary source, which is Ovid's Metamorphoses. So, what's the story? In this story, there's the god Apollo, the god of light and poetry and many other things. And he has set his sights on Daphne. He is just love at first sight. Colpo di fulmine. He is obsessed. He has to have her. And he's pursuing her and chasing her. And Daphne, who's the daughter of the river god, she is not interested in Apollo. So she's running away. So this is, this chase, this metaphorical chase. And Daphne, eventually, she can't get this guy off of her case. So she calls her dad. She's like, Dad, please help me. This guy Apollo won't leave me alone. Can you please save me from his unwanted advances? And her dad goes, I got this. Don't worry. I got this. Don't worry. Psh, turns her into a laurel tree. Well, Apollo gives up because he's not interested in a tree, and Daphne is safe. Obviously, she's a tree now, so it's maybe not ideal for her. But the idea is that this is telling a story in Greek mythology about the creation of the laurel tree by the gods. So this is the iconography or subject matter. But what does it mean? Why would a guy in the 1600s want to retell a story from, 1,000 years before? Well, then we need to talk about something called iconology. This is the meaning of the subject matter and how it could be understood within the historical culture or context that it was produced in. So in our example, the sculpture reveals the 17th century fascination with ancient Greek culture, literature, and art. It's showing off that Bernini, the artist, is familiar with ancient Greek mythology, and he's representing this story. And it also kind of shows off the intellectual and artistic taste of its patron, Cardinal Scipione Borghese. So this is what we mean when we talk about iconology. It's the meaning of the iconography. So hopefully this gives you a basic understanding of how we're going to talk about art. You have some basic vocabulary and you understand formal analysis and iconographic analysis. There are many other types of analysis when we're talking about artwork. Post-colonial analysis talks about how we understand the artwork in the global context of the history of colonialism. Feminist analysis might look at how gendered life experiences affect how the art style and subject matter and the art that is produced. So there are other ways that we're going to analyze art, but this gives you a basic introduction. The last thing I want to say is that in this series, we will be using the terms BCE and CE. When I was growing up, I went to Catholic school and we learned BC was before Christ and AD was Anno Domino. Anno Dominum, this is the year of our Lord. What draws the line between those two is 0. The year of the birth of You know, that really popular guy, JC, the man, the myth, the legend, Jesus Christ. So that year zero stays the same, but in this series, we're going to use BCE, before Common Era, and CE, Common Era, to talk about time periods. So hopefully you have gained an understanding of some of the basics of art history through this video, and now you feel confident that you have the language that you need to talk about art. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Subscribe to Art Trippin on YouTube. You can also check out Art Trippin on TikTok and Art Trippin with Prof D on Instagram. If you have any questions, please ask me questions here in the comments. And also if you have any suggestions or if there's anything that you want to see more from, let us know in the comments and we'll make some videos for you. I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin and this has been Art Trippin.